Well, welcome everybody to episode 3 of Noahgenda. Today I've got with me Taylor Mason. Taylor Mason, the man responsible for the title of the podcast. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's my claim to fame.
Well, it's a pretty big claim to fame, so I'm glad we could be part of it. Now, Taylor, you and I have been friends and not coworkers, but we have worked together professionally we were talking about it before we started rolling, 6 years now.
To like the day.
That is
It would have
crazy.
been, February or March, 6 years ago.
And that was when I was relatively new and you were brand new.
I was a month in. I think it was actually the first open house I ever sat.
That is crazy. And it was in my neighborhood.
It was in our neighborhood.
Yeah, it was in our neighborhood.
And
I had met another agent on a home tour, and he had told me about, oh, yeah, I'm holding this house open. I was like, oh, it's in my neighborhood. I'll come by. And then you were there, and the rest is history.
And that's it.
Man, the start of something beautiful. Now, I think it is safe to say that your social media activity is limited. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, it's more like, I guess you call it a lurker,
There you go.
right? You're not there actively participating. You're just keeping an eye on things.
Right. You know what's going on. You have social media.
Yeah, of
But
course.
for people who are watching this might be the first time they've seen you on social media.
Possibly.
It's very possible. So given that, I'd like you to just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. We'll start professionally, right? Since this is a professional setting. I'm in residential real estate. Been a real estate agent for the last 6 years. Predominantly in the North Valley, North Scottsdale, Cave Creek, North Phoenix. And I am at North & Co. I've been there 3 years. Before that, a smaller brokerage. That's been generally in business. That's kind of what I've been doing the last 6 years.
Yeah.
Real estate wise, real estate wise, I've been fortunate to become just a referral based agent. It's been all organic growth, and I've been fortunate to have what originally was a strong network that I really leaned into, and then of course that network evolved, and just slowly became a business that I'm pretty proud of.
And I want to get back to that about how you kind of built your business around your network, because I think it's something a lot of real estate agents strive for, right? They come from another industry. In many cases, real estate could be a second or third career for them. And they try to figure out a way to leverage all these people they know, right? Because everybody's going to tell you start with your sphere. And a lot of people have a hard time making that transition. But you've done a really good job. I do want to get back to that. But first things first, you are a bit of a renaissance man. Right. And some of these things, I feel like there are still things I find out about you, even though we've become like very, very good friends. Yeah. There are some things where, even years into us knowing each other, I felt like I found out about for the first time. So tell us a little bit about, you grew up in Utah.
Yep.
And you started a professional career very young.
Yep.
And tell us about kind of what your steps were, where you started, and
Yeah, it was steps and missteps and some stumbling and anyway, but here we are. Yeah. I've kind of been where I just follow I'm impulsive.
Yeah.
And when I find something I'm interested in, say, I want to do that. Okay, I'm just gonna do it. I mean, just go all the way, and we're just all in. And there's for me, it's my wife hates it, right? Because I'm all or nothing.
Yeah.
And to go back even farther, her brother who introduced us, he always would say, he says, Mason, your problem is, he's like, you're either working or you have to relax so hard, and you can't just like kind of relax. You have to relax so hard. Anyway, professional career started in restaurants, hospitality. I grew up working on my grandpa's farm and doing, labor like that. But then in high school, we lived in a small town and jobs were deplorable, right? I mean, garbage, right? Fast food, or if your parents didn't own a business, you didn't have a job other than I could make some money working as a busboy. And it was actually pretty decent, right? I was making like, I don't know, this is a while. It was 20 years ago, and I was making double minimum wage, and I was like, hey, that's a lot better than the alternative.
It's a ton of money as a young person.
Yeah, it was good, and I could work after school, and I was like, hey, anyway, so I started there, and I really liked it. There was something about the immediate, there's immediate satisfaction to serving a guest and having that service be recognized. And that recognition comes, of course, verbally, and of course comes in the form of tips. And the nice thing with restaurants also that I loved is you start over the next day. Right? Yeah. Every shift is a new time to improve, to perfect, to wipe the slate clean and do it again. You do that every single day. It'll also kind of make you crazy because you could always improve, and it's never, and it's a double-edged sword there. So that was my first, big boy job, my first W-2. And I was in restaurants, for, on and off, but basically on for about 7 years, right? In that time, what you don't know, right? In that time, I spent time in Central America learning to surf, learning Spanish, just hanging out. Came back to restaurants, and I decided instead of going just the front of house, right, the service side, I wanted to do the back of house. I felt like that would make me better. Yeah. It was just more respectable.
Yeah.
And so I started back of house, and I started in the hometown that I was born in, wood-fired pizzeria place that was very much modeled after Bianco's. In fact, he was the biggest catalyst for them starting the restaurant.
Like a direct influence.
100%. Not
a coincidence.
A huge influence, and it was neat because in that restaurant, we're really going deep, but we only had one heat source, the wood-fired oven. That's it.
That was it.
There was no range. There was no other oven. There was no microwave. There was a wood-fired oven.
Wow.
So you learn to bake cakes in a wood-fired, everything, right? Boil pasta in a wood-fired oven. Yes, you can do that. Anyway, I started as dishwasher. And then, long story short, I worked there for a few years. I moved my way up. I became a sous chef. The executive chef at the time was my now brother-in-law. Yeah. He introduced me to my wife. And then I became the executive chef. He moved on to the other restaurant. I then became GM. So did all of that. Was GM of the restaurant. My wife and I were married. We'd just gotten married, and we bought our first house, right? Bought our first house the day before we got married in Vegas.
There you go. Right.
And a year in, not even a year, like 6 months, I started getting bored, started getting an itch, and we had come down here to enjoy February weather in Scottsdale versus Utah, and we also decided to go to the Arabian Horse Show, which of course I grew up attending, grew up participating in, but I hadn't been for 6 years, 8 years,
Long time.
Basically since high school, right? And I was about 24 at the time. So we came down, and, Megan fell in love with Scottsdale. Like, this is really nice, right?
Scottsdale in February.
And we stayed at, we stayed at the Princess. And like, this is not real life. This is very nice. This is very nice. And we got thinking about participating in Arabian horses again. And, long story short, it wasn't that long. 6 months later, I was moving down here to work professionally with Arabian horses. Quit my job, right? I gave them they hated me, right? Because I think, I got the job offer to work down here. And while I knew it was coming, I got the job offer, and I think I had 10 days. So I didn't even give them full 2 weeks notice, which is not very nice, but...
But you're a young man.
Well, and I gave them all the notice that I had.
Yeah.
Job was offered. You're going to start on Monday. You need to be here, moved in.
How'd you get the job offer?
Okay. So I decided to come down and work professionally because someone who my dad had been working with horses, had his horses with him, started managing a farm or a ranch for a gentleman who was very well respected in the Arabian horse community. He had a great farm, he had a great reputation, and so I looked at it as saying, hey, if I'm going to come to work for Arabian horses, this is kind of like, well, it's not, I'm at a very low level, but it's kind of like being the bat boy for the Yankees.
Yeah.
Right. I'd rather go there. If
Right.
I'm going to do it, that's the way to start it.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's how I was given the job. I wasn't the lowest man on the totem pole, but I was only one notch up.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, we don't
Basically as low as it gets.
I call it the shit heel position. Sorry.
That's okay.
So that's it, right? I moved in on the property. So fortunately, they did provide housing. That housing was a double wide manufactured home that had 4 guys living in it. And in my bedroom, I had a hole, not quite the size of that table, about the size of this table.
Yeah.
In the floor, which of course, since it's manufactured, that means you go from the floor to dirt.
Yeah.
That had just a piece of like flagstone over it. That's where I lived. And I left the house that Megan and I owned. I left the restaurant that had been GM, right? I'd worked life was great.
Yeah.
To go work, making no money, working like a dog.
Yeah.
Living in
Squalor.
It was bad. Listen, when I moved in, they didn't have a trash can. It tells you the way it was.
4 guys living in a manufactured home.
It was rough. It was rough. And so I worked like crazy, learning everything I could. And fortunately, in that time, this is where really my life changed completely.
Yeah.
Was the gentleman I worked for who owned the property, who owned the farm. His name was Jim Bedecker, and he saw something in me, and he, not to go into all the details, but he promoted me.
Yeah.
And he put me in the management position, got rid of the other manager, allowed me to acquire ownership in the business.
Yeah.
And I was, young for that role, and really not, let's call it inexperienced to a degree.
Yeah.
But he saw that you for sure know enough of what you're doing, and you have the ability to learn more. And that's who I want in this seat.
Yeah.
And it was a huge opportunity. And, so I worked for him, and we did that. I managed for him for, I don't know, it wasn't that long. It was about 3 years is all.
Yeah.
In that time, I learned more about business and dealing with people than probably anything combined.
Yeah.
Due to some health issues, due to just life circumstances, it was, we made the decision to close that business.
Yeah.
And we gave, and so we knew that was coming. We said, okay, we got 6 months.
Yeah.
Right? 6 months for one, me to sell all the horses.
Yeah.
And then 2, figure out what am I going to do with my life. We moved down here for this.
Yeah.
We now have a child.
Right.
Right. Dean was only that was 2017. So he was a year, right? Year and a bit, 18 months old.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are we going to do? And it was a pivotal moment where it's like, hey, do I stay in this business, which I've been doing for the last 6 years or so?
Right.
Or is now the time to pivot into something completely new? And given just that industry and its outlook, I said, I think I could do something different.
Yeah.
And I said, I can sell horses. I can sell houses.
And you could sell a horse that was as expensive as some houses.
For sure. Horses range from, giveaway or $5,000 to multi-million.
Yeah.
And, in that 6 months, we had 46 horses gone. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Right. An unbelievable stress, but it positioned me to be ready to do something new. And if I could do that, and it's like, I could figure this out. This can't be that hard.
So let's recap.
Yeah.
You're living in Utah.
Yeah.
You've gone from busboy to GM of a very nice restaurant in town, right?
Yeah.
Restaurant
Yeah.
everybody knows. You've worked your way through to the top, right?
Yep.
GM now. Mm-hmm. And you tell your new wife, hey, I'm going to quit and I'm going to go live in a manufactured home with 3 other guys in a totally new business, making no money. I think this is a good plan for our family. And Megan was just like, yeah, that sounds like a great plan.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that shocking?
Yeah. I was talking, for people who have, I think, been successful in any industry, if they have a partner, the ability for that partner to put trust in the other person is absolutely crucial. because I had talked about this when I had Trevor on, which was I had told my wife, hey, I'm going to go from making a salary and a pretty good living to making $0 when I made the transition into lending. And we had a kid at the time and a mortgage, and we had 2 kids at the time and a mortgage. And she was like, yeah, that sounds like a great plan.
Yeah.
Right? Like, as opposed to her being like, no, you can't do that. Like, are you crazy? She was like, yeah, okay, I'm in. I trust in you.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened for you. So you go busboy, GM of the restaurant, onto the property, living with 3 other guys in a manufactured home, work your way up. You open this business with Jim, who became a big mentor of yours, right? Because as you mentioned, he taught you so much about business. And then even when you rolled into real estate, I know was a mentor for you professionally. Absolutely. And a very good friend, a very dear friend to you. And then you said, all right, I'm going to give this real estate thing a go after selling these horses. Before we move on to real estate, you had told me once something very interesting I think people might find interesting about the Arabian horse business.
Okay.
And some unique things about the business, the Arabian horse business from the 80s up until current.
Sure.
Do you want to?
Sure. Yeah. So, it has the Arabian horse industry has a colored past. One, a lot of people don't realize living here is, Scottsdale was built around Arabian horses.
Yeah.
You start walking around these roads, like McCormick Ranch, Lady McCormick's start of the Scottsdale show had Arabian horses. Gainey Ranch was an Arabian horse ranch. And then you go up further north, Chauncey, right? Tom Chauncey had one of the biggest Arabian horse farms. So it's a huge part of Scottsdale that a lot of people don't realize, and it still is, just not to the degree. Big thing with Arabian horses, there was a huge run-up up until 1984 because it was through just the way the tax law worked with ag and how they classified horses, but you could 100% depreciate the animal upon purchase. And so it was a really great way to, I don't know, how do you say, clean your money?
Launder your money.
Launder your money?
Yeah. I mean, that's what it was used for.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I mean, and not to say that the money was dirty coming in,
sure,
but it was a way to move money into an asset class that could, one, get 100% depreciated, and two, legitimize maybe that money that was, maybe it was just cash, but it was, clean cash, but not tax cash.
Right.
I don't know. That was before I was even alive. But in 1984, they changed the tax code, and the depreciation schedule became, I won't quote it because I can't recall, but it took, I think, like 10 years or 9 years. And that immediately, it basically made the market crash.
Yeah. I
mean, that industry, you had these massive farms who, we're talking, they did production then. This is in the 80s.
Yeah.
They were selling, and now an average horse then was like 50 to 100 grand. Right? And they were doing auctions where their average lot was auctioning off at, $500,000 plus. This is in the 80s.
Average.
Yes.
Yeah.
In that time, you could, my dad would always say, you can, you're guaranteed to, if you breed a mare, that foal is born at yearling age, you will be able to market that horse for like 3 times whatever the stud fee was for the stallion.
Yeah.
And, we have numbers then that we are just barely getting to now, almost 40 years later. But that's because those prices were so inflated because it made sense.
Right.
Right. And you had corporations that, were in these trusts that owned all these horses. And it was, you could look at it like a REIT.
Yeah.
Right. Where it's like, hey, we're going to invest in this. We're going to throw our money into this because it makes sense.
Yep.
Right. From a tax and just financial standpoint, it made sense. Right. But it completely crashed. And it never recovered from that.
Yeah.
And it never recovered from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's say 40 years for values to be even close.
And now they're still to those numbers, but not across the board.
Right.
And now, unfortunately, the basement's much lower, and it's tough. It's I have a lot of clients that are in that business still, whether we still own, or they are trainers or work for trainers or active participants in it, and it's brutal. Like, it's not for the faint of heart.
No.
And
big swings.
So the highs and then the lows, right? And they're just anyway. No, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough. So Megan supported me on the first move, right? Hey, yeah, come down here. Great. That sounds great.
Yeah.
And then I did it again. Hey, I'm going to, I've been perfecting this, and I became a GM, and I really, and now I'm managing this farm, and I'm a partner, and like, I know this business in and out.
Yeah.
No, let's just scrap it. Let's just
Start all over.
in the bin.
Yeah. So tell us about that. Tell us about then. All right. You say, hey, I'm going to go get my license. I'm going to become a real estate agent. No professional experience as a real estate agent. Selling a high ticket item. I suppose you could draw a correlation there. But tell us what it was like becoming a real estate agent, and kind of what the first, 6 months, a year were like.
Sure. And it's probably similar to your circumstances and your, experience getting into lending. But I went into it thinking, hey, this is something I'm interested in. We had owned property already. Working on a horse farm taught me a lot about like just the physical nature of real estate, of the product, and what, how you can use it and how you can manipulate it. Because it was an 11-acre farm. And so it was like, I think this would be interesting. I think I could really enjoy this. And got licensed. I had held my license for a couple months. We closed the farm in January. And then we actually bought our first house here in Arizona. That was my first real estate transaction. And then I said, okay, now we're moved into the house. I'm going to go work. I remember it was like February 1 of whatever that was, 2018. I said, okay, today's my first day of work of real estate agent. It's like, I don't know what I did, right? I have no idea what I did. We knew going in it'd be tough. I think that was one of the best things we prepared for, was while we closed the business, had 6 months run up, said, this is going to be tough. Yeah. And we're going to need to have, that money set aside, that like, how do we live until things are cooking? Yeah. And so we did first deal, right? Bought our own house. Okay, great. Made an ass of myself. The things I still remember, the things I said and asked. I was like, oh my God. Like,
does it give you patience for new agents when they're on the other side of the transaction now, remembering what it was like when you were new?
But only after like 2. Yeah. And then you've done enough, right?
Right.
There's grace for the first like 2. Yeah. But then
you should know what you're doing.
Yeah. And again, anyway, it was, you don't know what you don't know until you realize you don't know it. Yeah. And you find that through embarrassment. Yeah. And then I was a horse client. We actually was my second transaction. She knows, hey, you were my first client, my first paying client. And it was almost $1 million up in North Scottsdale. Cashed that check, and I was like, wow, this is easy, right?
Yeah.
You know what? That would have
super simple.
That would have taken me like some work in horses to get this check. All right, right. So we did that. 5 months. Yeah. Nothing. Nada. I mean, nothing. And in that time, of course, I'm, trying everything, bouncing here, bouncing there. Yeah. Today I'm going to try calling expired. Today I'm going to do this. Stupid. I'm going to, but I just tried everything, because that's what you do. You try and you find what sticks. And then fortunately after that, that 5-month drought. Yeah. Where, of course, whatever we saved to say, hey, this will get us through the liens, like, well, that's gone, right?
Right. You've exhausted that amount.
Because I think we planned for 6 months. Right? Yeah. And it was like, okay, yeah. So Taylor, you better start selling real estate. Yeah. If you're going to be in real estate, better sell some real estate. And then, then traction started. And then, it's one of those things that, as the traction you gain it gets quite a bit easier, right? Yeah. And you shift up from first to second, and then you're shifting up, and then you're at cruising speed, and there's still plenty of ups and downs, and plenty of, because of what the market brings us, or what have you, and that'll bring you back out, and you got to, that's how I look at it. It's like we shift down, and then we or we and then.
Well, it's an interesting 6 years too, right? In our industry. For sure. Right? we went from...
But it's all we know, right?
That's all we know. It's almost the blessing, right? It's like somebody who's getting started now. A lot of people, statistically, like transaction volume is way down, or was way down last year from the prior year.
Yeah, and still down, just slightly up from last year.
Right. But that means if you're new now, if you're a new lender or a new real estate agent, and you can make it work, or you made it work last year as your first year or early in, that's a really big testament to your ability, because if you are able to run a successful business now, it, I would say, is a very good sign for the future as things change. We know the business is cyclical. We don't know the exact timing of the cycles, but it's been an interesting 6 years. I think also, something I did want to talk about, which I think is perfect segue, is how you were able to leverage your experience and that niche of having been in the horse business into a successful portion of your real estate business. It's not everything. You don't just do horse stuff. You and I worked on plenty of just, normal first-time buyers, move-up buyers, whatever. But there is a section of your business that you've been able to be really successful with as it relates to like leveraging those relationships. So talk a little bit about how you were able to do that.
Sure. Yeah. So, and horse properties is really actually only a small, from a transaction volume, is actually a small part of my business.
Yep.
From a sales side, it's actually a pretty big number.
Yeah.
Just because they're large properties, these things they transact for a high price. But it was a very, honestly, it was an easy move.
Yeah.
It was an easy lateral to say, because I know what makes a horse property functional, what about it is actually a value add, what is a value decrease, what why is it important? And because I've lived it.
Yeah.
Right? I've lived it, I ran it, I know what the carrying costs are, what you can look, to see in the future. What is this going to be? What are we going to have coming up? There's a lot to them, because farms are really, they're horse farms or agriculture farms, meaning with livestock, are a moving and a breathing thing. And because you have animals on it, like there's something happening every day to it, and it changes the physical nature of the property. It's one of the few piece of real estate where the day-to-day actually changes the physical part of it.
Yeah.
But I understood that, and so it got really easy to go out and, one, find which properties made sense to purchase if we were purchasing, and two, on the listing side, why is this important?
Yeah.
Right? And why is this important? Why is it worth it? And being able to convey that to the prospective buyers, or even other agents who possibly haven't ever sold a horse property.
Yep.
You can look at one thing and say, oh, well, that looks important. It's like, no, that has almost no value, and that's really not a value add.
Yeah.
And on top of that, what it takes to be really good at horse property is understanding every discipline or every breed has their own specialties and own requirements.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's a matter of, well, what are you looking for? It's just like a car guy, right? Like horse properties and like car properties are very similar. Yeah. And it's like, well, what kind of car guy are you? Are you like a 4x4? Like, are you rock crawlers? You need, that type of garage. Yeah. Or are you, an exotics, and you need, it's what is the niche within the niche. Yeah. And what do they need? And then it's just a matter of, well, either finding it or giving a proper value to whatever suits their need. Yeah. I think the biggest benefit, for sure, was leveraging the network I had gained, who respected me through horses. Yeah. And knew that I understood what made these properties valuable, because I knew how to care for them. Yeah. And then it was really that network that then it was, well, this is just my friend. They don't have horses, but they're moving here, and we need you to buy a house or whatever. And that really constituted, the landslide of my total business in 6 years. Yeah. It's,
well, to your point, it's not just the person who owns the farm or the person who's looking to buy the farm. It's all the ancillary activities that are going on in regards to support staff. And those support staff people are buying homes. And then those support staff people have relatives who are buying homes. And it's building that network. Yeah. It's a network you can speak to. The other thing I think is important is that you spend a lot of time nurturing that pipeline, like how many horse shows are there in Scottsdale annually?
Well, God, that's hard to answer. For Arabian shows, there's 4 big Arabian shows a year.
Yeah.
There's
And
4
like
big ones.
during those, it's pretty much like full-time work for you, entertaining, going to these horse shows, networking, meeting clients, referrals of clients.
Yep.
And that's just here.
Yep.
And you've traveled for horse shows before
Traveled,
as well,
yeah.
right?
Traveled,
Oklahoma last year, was that last year or the year before?
Oklahoma and California, about the
Yeah.
2 I go to. Yeah, I go to Oklahoma every year for it. One, as with the horse network, but then also just my general real estate network is so many don't live here.
Yeah.
Or they don't like. Even if very few actually call it primary.
Yeah.
And so horse shows allow us to reconnect in a more organic manner and face to face, because we can't just, hey, you want to go grab a coffee? It's like, well,
they're not here.
I don't live here, so no. And so I like to do that. And then the other thing that I guess is a rarity, but I'll go fly to see them.
Yeah.
And because if they cannot come to me, well, why don't I just get a plane ticket and go see you?
Yeah.
And face-to-face interaction is critical, right?
It is.
Regardless of propelling a relationship forward or just maintaining, it can't be replicated.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing I do is like, I'll get on a plane and go see you.
Yeah.
Which I guess was surprising to some. For me, it actually seemed really natural because, back to the horse business, when you want to go say, hey, I want you to come, I want to show you what foals we had this year, what the foal crop looked like. Well, they can't bring their horses like in their pocket to show me.
Yeah.
And the only way to really see them is in person. So I was like, yeah, I would fly all the time. Like, let me pop over. I'll fly in for the day. I'll stay at your house. We'll look at the horses. We'll have dinner. I'll fly home.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, I'll just do the same thing and I'll just fly in. We'll hang out. We'll talk about real estate. We'll just hang out though.
Yeah.
And I'll fly home.
Yep. And that FaceTime is so valuable. If you were talking to somebody then who was building or wanted to build a niche, right, as part of their business. I was talking recently with a newer agent who was a nurse for 20 plus years. Mm-hmm. Shout out to Bridget if you're watching this. And she was like, listen, I've got 20 plus years as a nurse. So I know what these physicians need. I know what's important. Like I can relate to them. I can speak their language. Mm-hmm. But the problem is like, how do I leverage that into building that as a niche in my business? And I think your advice might be like, you've got to be where they are.
Yes.
So whether that's conferences or events or instructional events or whatever it is for that niche, you got to go to where they are and you have to prospect like full time. Right? You've got to build relationships. You've got to be involved. You have to ask for referrals. You've got to talk to them about your business. But even in your scenario, it's still just a section of what you do.
Yeah, but it's
big.
But it's big, and so it definitely gets the lion's share of my effort, my focus, and resources. To Bridget, right?
Yeah.
I would say my phrase is go to their table.
Yeah.
Right. Because they can't always, like, I do that because, well, they're not always here.
Yeah.
But for you, it's like, how do you be in front of them? It's like, you go to their table.
Yeah.
What are their events? Be there. Be there. Don't hawk real estate. Don't be, it's like, just be there.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I mean, I'm the long game, right? I'm a dinosaur hunter.
Yeah.
Where it's like, hey, these deals, these relationships are maybe 4 years.
Yes. Many times.
And with that, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Like I am okay with that because it's just how I wanted to build my business.
Yeah.
Was I wanted to be authentic and I wanted to be sincere, and I also wanted to I want to only work with people who I want to work with. Yeah. Because I've done the other and it sucks.
It's not as much fun.
It's no good. And so like be where they're at, right? And just be there. And it will, obviously you have to have conversations and have pointed conversations, but the rest comes, right? If you're there and that's how you stay front of mind and to the point of you can speak their language. Yeah. That's something you can't replicate that. No. Right? You can't, people try to fake it. Yeah. But
well, there was somebody else, and this goes, I think, to your point about being genuine with your audience. There was somebody I'd talked to who had a horse property listed, and I asked you just to check it out. And I think you're like, oh, like this stuff is not being marketed the right way. To your point, like this is not important to somebody looking at this property. This is important to somebody looking at this property. So you need to tie the two together. It's like, I'm an expert in real estate. I can help you navigate this potentially very tricky transaction, but I'm also an expert in making sure that the property delivers what the consumer wants. Right. And I think tying those two things, like when you work in, it's just so important, right? This understanding both sides. Hey, I'm an expert in the real estate, and like, I'm going to guide you through this and what things we need to look out for. But I'm also going to have a really deep understanding of what you need this property to do based off of the purpose for your purchase. So I think that's really, really good advice.
Yeah.
Today's March 19th. Last Friday, the National Association of Realtors, or NAR, proposed a settlement, right? It's not finalized, but they proposed a settlement regarding a bunch of lawsuits all over the country.
Countless.
I don't know how many now, right?
Don't.
But essentially, the center point of this litigation, the settlement, was how a buyer's agent is compensated. And a lot of your production is on the buyer side. So, I'm curious, it's obviously very timely, but to see what your thoughts are on kind of, how you think this could play out. And I think there's a multitude of ways, but what you think, it's going to look like come July or even before July and after, right? I say July because that's the time frame that the settlement is proposed to go into effect, right? These changes. But I'd be interested to hear what you think and what the chatter is around North & Co. and other professionals you talk to.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this earlier in the week. Yeah. It's I have no idea what's going to happen, and I think the minute you try to predict what's going to happen, you will for sure be wrong.
Right now, this is on video, so
for sure. So there will be no predictions today. What I think, though, I mean, the reality is, I'm going to look at this as solely a positive thing. Obviously, it has to get approved by the DOJ, but let's just say it does. All this does is force. It forces agents and their clients to have very direct, to the point conversations. Now, I don't want to oversimplify it, but I would say really the root of the original lawsuit is because there was not clarity on who was paying who and how that all happened. And that's a very easy channel. And I'm sure, and so it's just a matter of having that upfront conversation. And so, we've of course known, this lawsuit, 5 years in the making. We certainly, last fall knew, okay, well, when they could have been on the hook for 1.8 billion, we better start looking at this because we know something's going to shake out. So I think I told you, so I started implementing some more steps in my business to address these things up front. I'm before whatever's going to be required, but it's like, let's just figure this out and start implementing it. I think the key is people don't like to talk about the compensation, but this goes back to working with people you want to work with and who want to work with you. If there is a degree of respect and genuineness, it gets very easy to explain, one, how you expect to be compensated. And if that fits with them, great. And if it doesn't, well, is there another alternative? And having that conversation up front, then if you need to pivot, it's like you've already set kind of a baseline of what everyone's expectations are. So you didn't just like change the rule book. And I think that's what people really don't like is like when the rule book gets changed halfway through. And that doesn't seem fair. And it isn't fair. Right. And I think that's kind of what's been happening. Right. So in July, they're saying, hey, we're not going to allow compensation to be posted. It won't be advertised. Let's call it advertised, but it won't be posted. It won't be published. Published is a better word.
And currently, you have to disclose the buyer's agent's compensation on MLS.
Correct. Have to disclose and whatever it is.
Right. $1 or 3% doesn't make a difference.
Or zero, whatever.
Right.
And so that's one of the biggest things, right? Is it can't be published, and then of course any buyer's agent will have to have a buyer broker agreement. It's interesting. The buyer broker agreement is very rare in our market. It's actually very rare. In other markets, I was talking to a Chicago agent. It's like unheard of that they wouldn't.
Right.
It's just the way we do real estate. It's just the way our practice is done here is different than other places.
Sure.
It's it's just the converse of the listing side, right?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to prepare your house for sale. I'm going to market it. I'm going to do this, and this is how I'm expect to be compensated. This is our agreement.
Yeah.
It's just the converse of that for the buyer. This is what we're going to do. This is how I'm going to do it, and this is how it's going to be compensated.
Yeah.
And that requirement is really it's really a good thing. I think at the end, it's going to on the higher level of stuff or the higher end, really a lot of these requirements make, and I think I told you this, it makes it a little bit more like dealing with an off-market property.
Yeah.
Off-market property, it's like you're piecing buyer, seller together. Maybe there's an agent, maybe there's not. And it's having these very direct conversations like, hey, I have this buyer. I know you haven't sold. Would you want to sell? Okay, what would be the price? Okay, have you guys talked about compensation? Okay, what would they compensate? And you're just having these conversations, and
It's like matchmaking.
kind of, yeah. But it's like, it's all discussed. And now that's just going to happen more. Like, okay, so it's not published on the MLS. I have found a property that fits my client's needs.
Yeah.
Perfect. You ask.
Right.
Now the key is, and this, at the end, some of these requirements will weed out those that, are not having their client's best interest, or not working in good faith, or working as honestly as they could. Because now it kind of forces them to have these conversations.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know. We'll see what happens. There will be a lot more. I think on the lower end, what's going to come into play more is your side of things.
Yeah. I think it's very possible.
Because,
and what Taylor's referring to is, we work with a fair amount of first-time home buyers, especially recently, right? As rates came up, the move-up buyer really had to have a strong reason for moving. Additional member to the family, running out of space, whatever it is. But you had a lot of first-time buyers who still wanted to move out of rent. Now, the issue for first-time buyers is that rates have come up, prices have come up, and so a lot of them piecing together their down payment is a struggle, or piecing together their down payment plus closing costs is a struggle, let alone piecing together down payment plus closing costs plus compensation to their representation. I don't think anybody thinks the right solution is that buyers go unrepresented in the largest financial transaction of their lives. So I don't think that ends up being the case for buyers. There will be a way that this is resolved. Now, to your point, how it shakes out, I don't know. You could have a situation where listing agents talk to their seller about why it's an advantage to pay the buyer's agent, right? And so in that way, it kind of remains similar to the way it works now. You could have a situation where buyers pay a flat fee to their agent, or a per hour fee, or a per event fee to their agent. And to your point, you could have some changes in the way lending regulations exist, and perhaps the opportunity to maybe finance buyer's representation, whether that's a real estate attorney or a buyer's real estate agent, but where they can kind of finance the fee that the buyer's representation is taking, right? Kind of, now on the FHA side, you have upfront mortgage insurance premium. On the VA side, you have the funding fee. You could have something like that where that's allowed, or through seller concessions. Yeah. Now, seller concessions now are used to cover closing costs. So do they change how much seller concessions are eligible, right? Hey, we're going to cover this much with, we're going to cover our closing costs with this, and buyer's representation is with that. I think all we know for sure is that you're going to see a number of different ways that this problem gets solved after it's implemented. And something will rise to the top. Something will become, hey, this is kind of how it's normally
Standard
done.
practice.
Right. It'll be standard practice, even if there's 100 different ways. Because, if you read articles or if you're on social media, first of all, there's so much bad information out there, and bad information by alleged professionals on video.
Sure.
I was shocked.
Sure.
Right. And like, even one of these big headlines was like, the 6% commission rule is a thing of the past. There's no 6% commission rule.
Correct.
Right now, compensation is completely negotiable.
Correct.
You have people listing properties for 6%, and it's split between the buyers and the sellers. 5%, 1%, $990, right? It's all negotiable. So, if you are watching this, like, please make sure that the source of your news is a reliable and trusted source, because there is a ton of bad info out there.
But I think that goes to really most of those are just bad info in the headline and in the opening paragraph.
Yeah.
If you actually read articles top to bottom,
the whole thing,
it usually, I mean, I would say more than half the time, the article is actually going to negate or contradict what the headline states.
Yeah.
Right. At the end of the day, it's like the 100%. I mean, it's a conversation that should have been happening, and I think that's the problem.
Right.
And you do have because when it hasn't, it leads to bad feelings.
Yeah.
And people feeling slighted, or maybe being slighted,
or being misled. Right.
Or being misled, and I think to force the conversation and and having it be a requirement that in order to represent a buyer, you have to have that.
Yeah.
Well, that means you've had, but this is unfortunately the case, right?
Yeah.
You still have to have a conversation.
Yes.
You can't just, here, e-sign this.
Right.
Because as you know,
yes,
how many of your documents are actually read? I would say less than 10%.
A tiny percentage. Even when we spell things out for people, right? So when you first start doing this, you realize, there are certain things clients miss because they're not reading. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to spell it out in an email, and I'm going to bullet point it, and I'm going to bold it, and I'm going to highlight it, right? There's a very simple, in the initial disclosures when somebody goes under contract, there's a very simple example of this, which is you have to fill in your insurance. Mm-hmm. Now, when you first go under contract, most of the time you don't know who your insurance is. Right. So when we send those initial disclosures, we send an email with a list of things to do and not to do. And one of the things that we bold and highlight is, for the time being, just put TBD in the insurance space unless you know who you're using for your homeowner's insurance. So even though that's a separate email, it's highlighted and bolded. And it's one of like 6 or 7 bullet points. It's not a very long email. People still ignore it and go, what do I do with this insurance section? So to answer your question, what percentage of people are reading everything?
Don't call Noah regarding the insurance section.
Almost nobody reads it. So to your point, I think it's fair. And there are different states, right, where the rules about how it was disclosed were different. And I think a lot of that was opaque. And then a seller's at the signing table 100%. And they're like, wait, I'm paying who, what?
100%.
And I think that was the genesis kind of a lot of this litigation.
100%.
All right. So outside of work.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, what you do, what you like to do, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, I'm still involved with Arabian horses.
Yep.
Pretty passive now, right? We're not hands-on with them. Day to day, I mean, I'm a car guy like yourself, right?
Yep.
That's a passion. I also still love to really cook, right?
Yeah.
So I am the cook in the house.
Yep.
I cook, every meal that we eat at home, I cook.
Yeah.
We do not eat every single meal at home.
But if you're eating at home, you're preparing it.
Right. So, and that's something that's like the if I can get it, that's the really nice way. Yeah. Right? That's a really nice thing I look forward to, is like, and on the weekends, if it's a weekend where work is done early and it's like, hey, I can just cook, and kids are doing whatever, and it's like, and just sit there and get into it. It's like, that's kind of nice, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, I mean, you 2 young kids.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not that much time for the things that we like to do.
You have to incorporate them into the things you like to do.
We got a little bit of the hamster wheel happening, right?
Yeah.
I mean, get ready to go to school and all the things. So that's the big thing. I mean, I work, I take care of the family, right?
Yeah.
And cooking is still a really nice thing.
Yeah.
And it's a nice thing that I was able to learn that on a professional level.
Yeah.
I always preface it when people say, oh yeah, you used to be a chef. It's like, well, I was, but skills become less honed.
Yeah.
Even though I am cooking every day, it's still not the same.
No.
Right. And so I'm not where I was, and there's some skills that I've lost. I mean, as a whole, it's a nice skill set to learn.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think everyone should.
Yeah.
Right. Everyone should take some cooking classes and learn from professionals, because they're like tricks of the trade that make you better.
Right. It's
Right.
like a little thing that can make you like give you a lot of progress.
And just like, and really it's mostly just the fundamentals. I used to actually teach cooking classes.
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't think you knew
This
that,
is
right?
another thing. You learn something new. I'm telling you, every time you hang out with Taylor, there's something new.
And I was a yoga instructor as well.
Yeah, you had told me
Okay,
that, but I feel like that was like 4 years into our friendship that
yeah,
I
probably.
found out about that.
Yeah.
Well, and you have a lovely and like really successful partner too, your wife,
yes.
Megan, right?
Yes, and yes, and thank you for that. Megan is the fact that she has supported multiple moves, but these are not like, these are big pivots.
Right.
Not even related industries.
Yeah.
And she's like, go, right? But also, hey, but do your, like, go and do it. Go and be successful.
Yeah.
I am fortunate she's a financial advisor.
Yeah.
She worked for a family office here in Phoenix called TFO. And seeing how they take care of their clients.
Yeah.
And the depth that they go.
Yeah.
And the just their reach as to what they do for their clients is absolutely, it's unimaginable.
Yeah.
But it's like so that fiduciary, like, these are our clients and we do anything and we do everything. And it is really impressive to see that. It has made me a better real estate agent.
Yeah.
Seeing that, and the more I look at that and say, if that's what I think one thing I learned this year, from her and just seeing how she works and TFO and how they handle their clients, I thought, well, if I'm dealing with clients who could be a client,
Yeah.
and that's what they're used to, and that's what they're accustomed to on their financial side, right, or their wealth management side, I need to make sure what I am delivering on the real estate is of that same caliber.
Yep.
Right. But her also being as successful as she is has allowed me to, and it really is the only way.
Yeah.
It allowed me to build the business the way I wanted.
Yep.
And be able to say I want to work with the people I want to work with.
Yeah.
Because without that, no, it would have been significantly harder.
Yep.
Right, where you're like, oh, fine, I'll just work with this asshole.
Right.
And
Yeah,
it's like,
I hate this person's guts, but
then,
I got no choice.
And then you're gonna make mistakes. Or you're not gonna do the best for them.
No.
Like, you're just not, and it's just not good for anyone.
Yeah.
But I was, that's just the agreement it's just the life that we've built, where it's like, hey, we're both working, we're both doing that, and it allows each one of us, if we need to level up, kind of that space to be leveling up, where you're not quite at the level, but you're leveling up. So I don't know.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
And I just want to say thank you to you. It doesn't happen all the time that people who work together end up being friends, right?
I don't know.
But over these past 6 years, you have become like one of my closest friends.
For sure.
And I just want to say thanks for giving me a shot when I was new and you were new, and sticking through all of the changes, right? I think when I met you, I was at Nova and I was at AFN. I was at AFN and then moving to Nova and cross country, and being, I would say, a vocal supporter, and really close to my hip in business, but even more so as a friend. And you know how much I care about you and your family, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us, and I truly appreciate you, man, in more ways than one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was good to be here. Thank you.
Good.